The 1980s. The 80s was quite the decade in American history, filled with excitement like space travel, big budget action movies, and the Showtime Lakers. Also, US citizens being held hostage in Iran, and political scandal, and the rise of crack cocaine. Now, let's dive into the 1980s. 1980. We start off the 80s with Jimmy Carter as President of the United States. During this time, he was dealing with the Iran hostage crisis, which started in 1979, where 53 US citizens were being held captive in Iran. He was also dealing with the ongoing Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. In early January, Walter Cronkite of CBS Evening News reported on the Iran hostage crisis. In February, during the Olympic hockey match, the United States surprisingly beat the heavily favored Soviet Union, who had won 4 consecutive gold medals. In April, President Carter ordered Operation Eagle Claw as an attempt to rescue the US hostages from Iran. It resulted in a failure, with 1 helicopter crashing and 8 US service members perishing during the operation. In May, the Rolling Stones article, Freebase, A Treacherous Obsession, was published, and it touched on the rise of crack cocaine. This thrusted the growing crack epidemic into the national spotlight. Moving on to sports. In May, the Lakers beat the 76ers for the NBA championship. Rookie Magic Johnson helped the Lakers win by scoring 42 points, getting 15 rebounds and 7 assists. And this would be the first of 5 Lakers championships in the decade. Also in May, Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back was released. It's the second film to the original Star Wars trilogy, and it made $4.9 million in its opening weekend. In June, media magnate Ted Turner launched his 24-hour news channel called the Cable News Network, or abbreviated as CNN. In October, Pac-Man the game was released in US arcades, becoming one of the most popular games of all time. Millions of Americans were huddling around Pac-Man machines, playing as the round yellow mouth man. In November, Ronald Reagan beat Jimmy Carter for the US presidency. In December, a 19-year-old Eddie Murphy makes his first appearance on Saturday Night Live, and it was during the Weekend Update segment, and this was the beginning of his growing stardom. As for music, some of the popular songs of that year were Call Me by Blondie, Cars by Gary Newman, and Escape, or better known as the Pina Colada song by Rupert Holmes. 1981. In January, Ronald Reagan was sworn in as the US president, and a new era of Reaganomics was ushered in. Shortly after his swearing in, the Iranians released the US hostages who were being held. In March, anchorman Walter Cronkite signs off of CBS Evening News for the last time after 19 years of service. In June, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark was released and had gained $8 million in its opening weekend. In August, Music Television, or MTV, was launched in the United States, becoming the first 24-hour cable network playing music videos. This channel would influence Generation X and millennials in later years. By the fall of 1981, the United States was experiencing a slight recession, with an unemployment rate at 7 or 8%. The Reagan administration would announce a slight recession in October. Also in October, the Los Angeles Dodgers beat the Yankees to win the World Series. And this was a redemption win for the Dodgers, after losing to the Yankees in both 1977 and 1978 World Series. As for music, popular songs of the year included Bet Davis Eyes by Kim Carnes, Jesse's Girl by Rick Springfield, and Just the Two of Us by Grover Washington and Bill Withers. 1982. In January, Eddie Murphy makes his first appearance on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and he gives a stand-up comedy routine.
Thank you. Shut up.
Also, in January, Ronald Reagan delivered his first State of the Union address to the nation. In his speech, he talked about decreasing the deficit and economic growth. During this time, the recession was still going strong in early 1982. By March, the unemployment rate had risen to 9%, and millions of Americans were still out of work. Now on to sports. In June, the Los Angeles Lakers beat the 76ers again for the NBA championship. In the summer of '82, 3 films were released that would influence the science fiction genre for decades to come. Those movies were E.T., a Steven Spielberg film where an alien is left behind on Earth and a boy and his friends that he encounters try to help him find a way back to his home. It made $11 million during its opening weekend. There was also Blade Runner, which is set in a futuristic Los Angeles, where Officer Rick Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, is tracking down rogue androids. In Tron, a movie about a man named Kevin Flynn, played by Jeff Bridges, that gets zapped by a laser and uploaded into a virtual world, where he has to fight his way through the system. In September, the recession hit its peak, with unemployment at 10%. The first time it's hit double digits since 1941. Although the economy wasn't doing too well, there was a growing genre of music during this period. The music genre known as hip-hop was still growing. In 1982, Afrika Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force released a song called Planet Rock. In October, Disney World in Orlando, Florida opens its Epcot Center, which stands for Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. It has since become a staple of the theme park. In November, Michael Jackson released his 6th studio album called Thriller, which would become the best-selling record of all time. The album contained popular songs such as Billie Jean, Thriller, and Beat It. By December, the recession was starting to level off. However, an estimated 12 million people were still unemployed. Let's move on to popular songs. We have Jack and Diane by John Cougar Mellencamp, That Girl by Stevie Wonder, and Eye of the Tiger by Survivor. 1983. In February, the final episode of MASH aired on television after 11 years on air. The show was based off the feature film MASH, which was released in 1970. In March, the hip-hop group Run DMC released its debut studio album titled Run DMC, with songs such as It's Like That and Hard Times. Another significant moment in March is Michael Jackson debuting the iconic moonwalk during his performance of Billie Jean on Motown's 25th anniversary TV special. In April, the Disney Channel was launched on cable television. The first program to ever air on the channel was Good Morning Mickey. In May, the 76ers won the NBA championship. They beat the Lakers 4 games straight in the series. And this was a redemptive win for the 76ers after losing the 1980 and 1982 championships to the Lakers. By the summer, the nation's economy began to recover, with employment numbers increasing in a few sectors, like housing construction and the service industry. In August, the Space Shuttle Challenger was launched into space, carrying 5 crew members: Richard Truly, Daniel Brandenstein, Dale Gardner, William Thornton, and Guyan Bluford, who became the first African American to go into space. In October, Eddie Murphy's stand-up special Delirious was released on HBO. In November, Martin Luther King Day was signed into effect by President Ronald Reagan, becoming a nationally recognized holiday honoring the late civil rights leader, Martin Luther King. By December, the nation was still recovering from the recession. The unemployment rate fell down to 8%. A few notable movies to come out in '83 are James Bond, Never Say Never, which would be Sean Connery's last James Bond film, and The Outsiders, which had a young all-star cast consisting of Ralph Macchio, Emilio Estevez, Matt Dillon, Tom Cruise, and Patrick Swayze, and the movie Scarface, starring Al Pacino, the story about a young Cuban immigrant living in Miami that fights his way to the top of the criminal empire. His main business is the drug business, which heavily involves cocaine. This film highlighted the drug game going on in the United States at the time. The movie would grow to become one of the most influential crime films in history, with memorable quotes.
Okay, you wanna play what? Okay. Say hello to my little friend!
Now, onto popular songs. There was Every Breath You Take by The Police, Sweet Dreams Are Made of This by The Eurythmics, and Little Red Corvette by Prince. 1984. In February, the Democratic Party presidential primaries were taking place to decide who was going to run against President Ronald Reagan. The three main Democratic contenders were former Vice President Walter Mondale, who served under President Jimmy Carter, Gary Hart, a senator from Colorado, and Jesse Jackson, a civil rights activist that worked with Dr. Martin Luther King. In February, Walter Mondale would win the Iowa caucus. Also in February, Michael Jackson won a record of 8 Grammys at the Grammy Awards. 2 of the Grammys he won were Record of the Year for Beat It and Album of the Year for Thriller. In June, Ghostbusters was released in theaters. Also, the theme song Ghostbusters, which accompanied the movie soundtrack, made its way to the top 100 Billboard. In July, the Democratic National Convention took place, with Walter Mondale as the party's nominee for president and Geraldine Ferraro for vice president. In October, the Terminator movie was released, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. He plays a death robot sent back in time to assassinate Sarah Connor, the mother of the resistance leader. This movie kicked off the Terminator franchise, which has since spanned a few decades. In November, Ronald Reagan won his second term as president by beating Democratic contender Walter Mondale by a landslide. However, the crack epidemic was still ongoing in the United States. The drug was available in every major US city across the country, like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami. In December, one of my all-time favorite comedy movies, Beverly Hills Cop, starring Eddie Murphy, was released in theaters. It made $15 million in its opening weekend and became the highest grossing film in 1984. Popular songs of the year include What's Love Got to Do With It by Tina Turner, All Night Long by Lionel Richie, Like a Virgin by Madonna, and When Doves Cry by Prince. 1985. In January, Ronald Reagan is sworn in for a second term as US president. Also in January, Run DMC's second album, King of Rock, was released. It became the first rap album to be released on compact disc. Some of the songs featured on the album were Rock the House, King of Rock, and Jam Master Jammin'. In February, the movie The Breakfast Club was released in theaters. A movie about a group of teens with different social circles that serve in detention on a Saturday. The movie starred Emilio Estevez, Judd Nelson, Molly Ringwald, Ali Sheedy, and Anthony Michael Hall. In March, 18-year-old Mike Tyson made his professional boxing debut facing off against Hector Mercedes. Tyson won in the first round. Also in March, the World Wrestling Federation, or the then WWF, showcased its first WrestleMania at Madison Square Garden in New York City. In June, the LA Lakers beat the Boston Celtics for the NBA championship. In July, the movie Back to the Future, starring Michael J. Fox, was released in theaters. It became the highest grossing film of the year. In October, the Kansas City Royals won the World Series against their cross-state rivals, the St. Louis Cardinals. This series was known as the I-70 Showdown because both cities are connected to the Interstate 70 highway. In November, Microsoft released its first version of Windows. It was called Windows 1.0. Popular songs for '85 include Oh Sheila by Ready for the World, Summer of '69 by Bryan Adams, and The Power of Love by Huey Lewis and the News. 1986. In January, Martin Luther King Day was observed federally for the first time, after being signed into law in 1983. In March, the movie Highlander released in theaters, starring Christopher Lambert, Sean Connery, and Clancy Brown. This movie would kick off the Highlander movies and television series in the decades to come. In May, the movie Top Gun was released in theaters, starring Tom Cruise. It became the highest grossing film of the year. In June, the tragic passing of basketball player Len Bias occurred due to cardiac arrhythmia related to a cocaine overdose. Lynn was selected by the Boston Celtics as second overall pick in the NBA draft just 2 days before his passing. A few weeks later, Congress would begin writing the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986. In September, First Lady Nancy Reagan addresses the drug crisis in America by giving her famous "Don't Do Drugs" speech.
Say yes to your life. And when it comes to drugs and alcohol, just say no.
In October, President Reagan signed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which established mandatory minimum sentences for those caught possessing a certain amount of crack. It also expanded federal support for drug treatment and rehabilitation programs. In November, Mike Tyson, who was 20 years old at the time, won his first heavyweight title against Trevor Berbick. He won the fight in the second round. He would become the youngest heavyweight champion in history. Also, the Iran Contra scandal broke out to the public. It was revealed that senior officials in the Reagan administration facilitated the sale of weapons to Iran. The administration wanted to use the money from the sale to fund the Contras rebel in Nicaragua.
Now, my fellow Americans, there's an old saying that nothing spreads so quickly as a rumor. So I thought it was time to speak with you directly, to tell you firsthand about our dealings with Iran. As Will Rogers once said, rumor travels faster, but it don't stay put as long as true. So let's get to the facts. The charge has been made that the United States has shipped weapons to Iran as ransom payment for the release of American hostages in Lebanon.
In December, hip-hop group Salt-N-Pepa released their debut album, called Hot, Cool, and Vicious. The album included the song Push It. Also, it was the first rap album by a female rap group to attain gold and platinum status in the United States. Now, on to popular songs. Higher Love by Steve Winwood, Take Me Home Tonight by Eddie Money, and Walk This Way, a remix by Run DMC, from the original song by Aerosmith. This song was one of the founding songs of the rap rock genre. 1987. In January, President Reagan gave his State of the Union address. In his speech, he addressed the Soviet Union outspending the United States in their military budget. He also addressed raising the literacy rate for the nation's children. In March, President Reagan would also address the Iran Contra again.
I am still the one who must answer to the American people for this behavior. And as personally distasteful as I find secret bank accounts and diverted funds, as the Navy would say, this happened on my watch. Let's start with the part that is the most controversial. A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
In April, the Fox network makes its premiere. It premiered the shows Married with Children and The Tracy Ullman Show, which, the animated series The Simpsons, made its debut. Now, June was filled with a few historical events for the year, and really for the decade. First of all, the movie The Predator was released in theaters. It stars Arnold Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers as part of a team of soldiers that are being hunted down by an alien in a Guatemalan jungle. Another big event in June was that the Lakers won another NBA championship by beating the Boston Celtics. This will become their fourth championship win in the 80s. And finally, President Reagan gave his most famous speech in Berlin, Germany, where he asked the Soviet General Secretary, Mikhail Gorbachev, to tear down the Berlin Wall.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In July, the movie RoboCop was released, starring Peter Weller. The movie was set in a dystopian Detroit that was overridden by crime and corporate corruption. In August, Michael Jackson released his album, Bad, and it sold more than 2 million copies in its first week. In September, the show Full House debuted on ABC Network. It starred Bob Saget, John Stamos, and the Olsen twins. In November, the U.S. State Senate released reports charging President Reagan as responsible for the Iran Contra Affair. In December, Eddie Murphy released his comedy special, Raw. Now, popular songs of '87. Here I Go Again, the re-recorded version by Whitesnake, Who's That Girl by Madonna, I Wanna Dance With Somebody by Whitney Houston, and Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley, a song that would come back to haunt us all in the early 2000s by unexpectedly popping up in YouTube videos, deceiving those that clicked on it. The bait and switch would become known as Rickrolling. 1988. In January, President Reagan delivers his final State of the Union address to the American people. Also, the Republican Party presidential primaries began, with Vice President George H.W. Bush, Senator Bob Dole, and Minister Pat Robertson as its frontrunners. In February, the Democratic Party presidential primaries began. The main frontrunners this time were Michael Dukakis, Jesse Jackson, and Al Gore. In June, the LA Lakers won their 5th NBA championship of the 1980s by beating the Detroit Pistons in Game 7. Also in June, the comedy movie Coming to America, starring Eddie Murphy, was released in theaters. It's a story about a prince from the fictional country of Zamunda that comes to America to find a wife. Another comedy classic that came out in June was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, starring Bob Hoskins and Christopher Lloyd. It grossed $350 million worldwide, becoming the second highest grossing film in 1988. In July, the Democratic National Convention took place, with Michael Dukakis as the party nominee for president and Lloyd Bentsen for vice president. In August, the Republican National Convention took place, with George Bush as its party nominee for president and Dan Quayle for vice president. Also, the album Straight Outta Compton was released by NWA, with hit singles like Express Yourself and Fuck the Police, and Straight Outta Compton. Now I know it's been a while since I've done this, but let me remind you, don't ever, and I mean ever, forget about the most important doctor that ever lived, and that's Dr. Dre. Now moving on. In September, the first presidential debate between Vice President Bush and Michael Dukakis took place at Wake Forest University. In October, the Los Angeles Dodgers won the World Series by beating the Oakland Athletics. This was the Dodgers' second World Series win of the decade. In November, George H.W. Bush won his bid for president and defeated Michael Dukakis. Popular songs of '88, Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, Fast Car by Tracy Chapman, and Man in the Mirror by Michael Jackson. 1989. In January, President Reagan delivers his farewell address to the nation.
My fellow Americans, this is the 34th time I'll speak to you from the Oval Office, and the last. We've been together 8 years now, and soon it'll be time for me to go. But before I do, I wanted to share some thoughts, some of which I've been saving for a long time. It's been the honor of my life to be your president. So many of you have written the past few weeks to say thanks, but I could say as much to you. Nancy and I are grateful for the opportunity you gave us to serve.
And George H.W. Bush is sworn in a week later. In February, President Bush addressed Congress for the first time. In his speech, he talks about investing in the future, tackling the deficit, and also no new taxes.
And no new taxes.
In March, Time Incorporated, the magazine company, and Warner Communications, the parent company of Warner Brothers, announced a merger between the two companies and would now be known as Time Warner, which would in turn grow to be one of the largest media companies in the United States. In the summer of '89, there were 3 classic movies released that would take over the summer. They were Ghostbusters 2, the sequel to the beloved first movie. Let's not forget about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the 3rd installment of the Indiana Jones series, starring Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. And finally, there was Batman, starring Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson as the Joker. The movie made $40 million its opening weekend, which set a new box office record at the time, and it finished the year with over $250 million domestically. In June, the Detroit Pistons won the NBA championship by beating the LA Lakers 4 games in a row. This was a redemption win for the Pistons after losing to the Lakers the year before. In July, the Nintendo Game Boy was released in America, with games such as Tetris and Super Mario Land. Within the first few weeks of release, it sold more than 1 million units. In September, during a speech to the American people, President Bush holds up a bag of crack cocaine.
Our most serious problem today is cocaine, and in particular, crack. This is crack cocaine, seized a few days ago by drug enforcement agents in a park just across the street from the White House.
This has got to be one of the funniest things I've seen from a president in my entire life. Now on to popular songs. Me, Myself, and I by De La Soul, She Drives Me Crazy by Fire Young Cannibals, and Bust a Move by Young MC. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe for more content. And this concludes another episode of The Voice of Rhino.